Hey, ruckus makers, that means you are invested in your continuous growth. You are challenging the status quo, and you are also designing the future of school now. I want to talk to you today about three questions every ruckus maker, every educator really must ask. Basically, I gave a talk today at Syracuse City School District, and it was similar. There was, they don't know me like you know me. So I had to do the whole intro and that kind of thing. But I want to share the same three stories because I think there's value in that. First story is going to be my origin story as a school leader. Second story is my origin story as a school administrator. And then the third story is the origin story of the Better Leaders, Better Schools podcast. Each of those stories illustrate the three questions I want every ruckus maker watching to ask. And I'll preview the questions now too. Question one is, what is your why, right? Why did you choose the profession of education? Question number two is, who is somebody that you can call out their gifts for this year? Like, who needs to hear that? Who needs your encouragement? Who can you see the superpowers, their zone of genius, and maybe they're blind to it, right? Derek Sivers has a lovely quote, and he says, "What is ordinary to you is extraordinary to me." I love that quote because it means that we often take for granted, right, the awesome stuff that we do, and we just count it as like regular, like riding a bike. But to somebody else, they're like, "Whoa, yeah, how do you do this thing?" And we discount it and we devalue it. Okay. So call out the gifts in others. They might not even realize what seems like riding a bike to them is so special. And then the third question I want every ruckus maker to ask would be, what is an experiment you can run this year? And what if it works? All right. Last thing I'll say before the three stories would be, if you are currently leading in a school or district, consider using these questions too with your staff. I challenge you to go out into nature, process, reflect on these questions and your answers, share them to your staff because you're a 3D character. You're not just principal. Like you are a person, right? That's three-dimensional and have a lot of things about you that they would love to know. Actually, I'm gonna brag on one of my favorite ruckus makers, Lauren. Lauren is in his second or third year as principal of a elementary school in Washington, D.C. And he had the tough job that many principals had over the last few years. He entered a new school year during COVID. So he actually, until the school year kickoff workshop that I led for him just 2 weeks ago in person in Washington, D.C., professional milestone at the Kennedy Center of the Performing Arts, he had never met his staff, some of them, face to face until this year. Can you imagine that? Well, not only had he not met them face to face, they felt like they didn't know him yet. And so I taught him this concept of 3D dimensional character. And shout out to my business coach, Ron, who taught it to me or helped me understand, that it is important in the world of serving school leaders as well. Anyways, long story short, he did, like, have you ever seen The Moth, right? Like, The Moth is a pretty cool story skill workshop experience, that kind of thing. And they have a podcast, and you could check out their content. The people tell awesome stories. So he modeled his story after that, opened himself up, and was vulnerable about his family and raising kids right now and what he's experiencing. And his staff loved it, right? So that's my way of saying, do the questions in nature, process, reflect on your answers, and share them with your staff because they want to know you as a human being. And then challenge them to answer that stuff because you want to know them as well, where they're coming from. And then tell them, right? It's the ripple effect. Have them do it in their classroom because then their kids get to know them as teachers and they get to know their students. Like, you need to encourage them to do that. All right. Story number one. So, story number one is how I became a teacher. I didn't want to be a teacher. I wanted to be rich. Like, that was my goal. It didn't matter how I did that. Could have been selling drugs, could have been going into politics, it could have been, being a lawyer or a doctor or something, right? I wanted to make a lot of money. And there's a reason for that, right? Growing up, I think I had an experience where I was a part of a high middle class, upper middle class, affluent house. Had everything I wanted, every toy I could ever desire. Basically, life was really good, vacations, all the good stuff. And then at some point, my parents split, right? Parents split. My dad, who was I believe, a lawyer for a bank, right? Lawyers do well by themselves. Being a lawyer for a bank, you do even better because banks have a lot of money. And anyways, my mom had to be, right, a single mom and taking care of me and my sister and the sole provider. So things changed quickly overnight. And I'll never forget, they were trying to teach me financial literacy. So back before you could log on to your bank online, right? And remember when checks were a real thing? There was a thing called a bank register, right? And you would keep track of your deposits and withdrawals and see your account, go up or go down, right? My parents were teaching me financial literacy. They were paying me for chores. I saw thousands of dollars uh, get deposited in my account. And then one day, because of the split, we had to live off of the money. I mean, it was my mom's money anyways. So, I didn't blame her for that. But that was traumatizing because I saw the money go down to zero. And it gave me a scarcity mindset back in the day and an unhealthy relationship with money. And that's why I wanted to be rich, right? So in middle school, high school, one of my best friends was named Johnny Brogan. Mr. Brogan was awesome. The whole family was awesome. And that family had everything too, like the experience I used to have. They probably had more than we had as me growing up. They had a car phone before mobile phones were like a thing. They had a second house in Galena. We didn't have a second house. That's like, it was a really cool home too. An old schoolhouse, in fact. And so, really, a lot of history there. And I remember Johnny having every new pair of Air Jordans that came out. I never had Air Jordans growing up, not once. And can you believe when I did finally become a teacher, the first check that I cashed, what did I buy? The first purchase was a pair of Air Jordans because I never had them before. All right, but how did I become a teacher? So Mr. Brogan to me was the illustration of success. The family had everything that they could ever want. They were obviously financially very stable, and doing quite well. And so I asked him as a high school kid, what should I do in college? And the interesting thing, now he traded stocks and bonds from my recollection on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. The interesting thing, this guy who was so successful, right, in terms of money, he said, Danny, if I could do it all over, I would have become a teacher. Imagine my shock when I'm thinking, how am I going to earn all this money, make all this money? And somebody who's a father figure in my life and an example of success in my life says, I would have been a teacher. And like that, my profession was decided and I went to college to be a teacher. So that's question number one, or story number one. Story number two, how did I get into administration? I never wanted to be an administrator, right? Never. I love being in the classroom, highly successful, won all the awards that teachers can win. Like, it was a really awesome experience. Great relationships with staff members, great relationships with students. I was thriving and super duper happy. Then one day I'm working out with one of my great friends, DeAndre Weaver, and he was being offered his first principal position at a school named Brooks College Prep. And he said, Danny, I need people on my team that I can trust, and I need people who can do the work and be an awesome leader. You have leadership skills you're not utilizing. I see these leadership skills in you, and I want you to join the team. I would have never, ever defined myself prior to that conversation as a leader, even though I led like the Avid team at the middle school and did some other things, right? Leadership wise and coach, but I just didn't think of myself like that. Dre called out my gifts. I see leadership in you, and I want you on my team. And just like that, I told him I would think and pray about it. And I thought and I prayed. And somebody who was really happy in the classroom suddenly became discontent with the day to day experience in the class. And so I told him, I'm in. So I became an instructional coach, got my admin credential. And before you knew it, here I am, an administrator. And that's all I have to say about story two, which brings us to story three, the origin story of the podcast. So now I'm an administrator. And I am experiencing some real tension because as a classroom teacher, I had years of experience and was highly effective winning awards. I like to be a top performer. Now I'm a baby, brand new, novice administrator who has no clue what they're doing and highly ineffective. This is a problem and I want to solve it as quickly as possible. So I have two paths. Path one, I could create an award and win it for the administrator who has it certainly the worst out of all the administrators in the world, right? Woe is me. Or I could be a part of the solution and figure out how to grow my skill set. You see, the problem as a brand new administrator, I had this aspiration, this vision for myself that was yet to be realized, but I knew I could be great. The problem was that I lacked experience and the professional development internally was too little too late, unhelpful, and disconnected. It did not ever teach me how to be a better leader. So I started the podcast. I figured if I talked to people smarter than me, then I would grow, right? I learned from their stories of success and failure. And most importantly, if I took action on one idea they taught me, then everything else would change. Well, if you're familiar with my work, you know the rest. The rest is history. The Better Leaders, Better Schools podcast has over 1.6 million downloads. 11 weeks ago, I found out that it is ranked in the top 0.5% of nearly 3 million, all the global shows worldwide. BLBS is in the top 0.5%. See that book back there, right? That book is available. If you got even one idea from today's talk that makes you better today or a bit more inspired, please go pick up that book. Even if you picked up the book already, give it to a friend. I'm on a mission to connect, grow, and mentor every school leader who wants to level up. But that door was open for me. Corwin published the book. They asked me to do the book. The National Superintendents Association, they asked Corwin to be a co-publisher. It's amazing how the podcast had absolutely changed my life. And I did it because it was an experiment. I had to take my own development in my control. And my solution was to learn from others and take action on what they taught me. And here we are today. So, the three questions in review, right? Number one, what is your why? Why did you get into education? Number two, who is somebody that you can call out their gifts? They need to hear from you. Show them what you see that they don't see in this school year. And then number three, what is an experiment that you can run, kind of like my podcast? And what if it works? Hope you have a great day. Bye for now and go make a ruckus.